I had trouble getting in as well. Any thoughts of what I should?
It made me update.
Maybe she's not.
You know, Catherine, there was an update, I think, on Zoom that just came out this week. And I think people that haven't done the update may have problems.
I had trouble with my link on the reminder this afternoon. I tried twice and it didn't work. So I went back to the original email from yesterday and that link worked. I don't know if there's a difference.
Yeah, something odd.
Well, Mitzi was on fine. We were on Monday night and she didn't have any trouble with Zoom. And so we were on 2 different Zooms and we were on Google Meeting.
And that was a joke.
It was definitely a joke, yes.
Well, we're waiting for a few more folks to join us, but it is 5:31. So I guess we'll start running through a couple of what we all sort of know now, some of our logistic pieces. Task force members, you have the option at the top of your screen to choose between speaker view and gallery view. Gallery view lets you do the Hollywood Squares thing where you can see everyone on the screen. Speaker view, if you find that distracting, or if you really want to focus in on whoever's talking right now, you can always switch that to speaker view and it'll make whoever's talking, like me at the moment, my big face, much bigger so that you can kind of focus in. So feel free to toggle between those and see what's right. Make sure that you have that chat box up and running. And if you're not speaking, we'd ask that you put yourself on mute. I'm hearing a little bit of background noise. So just make sure if you are calling in on your phone that your computer or tablet volume is all the way off and that you're kind of muting yourself to limit any background noise. I'm not exactly sure where it might be coming from, but I'll keep watching and investigating. We'll be using the chat box to keep in touch with each other today. You know, we have a couple of attendees. Looks like Commissioner Savas is in the audience observing our meeting. So hello, Commissioner Savas. Nice to have you here. And we'll maybe, if you'd like to say a few words during public comment, we'd welcome those, words from the Commissioner and anybody else. I think Lisa's here, so I think I'm going to stop chatting and turn it over to your chair.
Hi, everybody. I'm just going to do a really quick roll call. So far, I can see May is not here. Is that right? Am I missing her? Looks like she's not here. Is Nancy Turner's here? Okay.
I think
and
I saw
Margaret
to log in a minute ago. So
sorry.
I think I tried to see May. I saw May try to log in a minute ago. So
okay. Margaret's here. Is that right? Yes. Yes. If you were alphabetical, it'd be so easy. And Nancy's here. And Libby, where are you, Libby?
I'm here.
Okay, there you are. Sorry. And Beverly, I saw. And Lanny, I thought I saw. There you are. I see you now. And Leslie, I saw.
Hi, Lisa.
Is there anybody that I missed besides May? She's the only one that I don't see.
May's here.
May's here now.
Yeah.
Oh, hi, May. I see you now.
And you got Christy, right?
And I got Christy.
Yeah, I didn't hear my name.
I'm sorry. Yes, and I got Christy. Is there anybody else that I missed? Okay.
Natalie's here.
Did I miss you, Natalie?
I didn't hear you say my name.
Oh, gosh. I'm sorry.
That's okay.
Is there
I'm
anyone, anybody else that I did not say your name? I'm sorry.
How about Todd?
And Todd, did I say your name? I think what I did was I looked down the list and I saw people. So if I saw you, I didn't say your name. I'm sorry about that. Next time I'll just say your name and it won't be confusing. Okay.
I was great at the beginning.
You were right at the beginning. I did see you. I'm sorry. You were recognized. So let's go ahead and approve the minutes and get that out of the way. Does anybody
and just to note also that we have Deborah Bukowski's here as well. She was waving. So hello, Deborah. Deborah's also present.
Hi, Deborah. I'm sorry. Did I miss you too? I didn't say your name. I saw you on the list as well. Sorry. Are there any corrections or changes that we need to make to the minutes? So shall we go ahead and do a thumbs up approval if you approve? Just show your thumb so we can see it. Lanny, I don't see yours. Is it up? Yeah, okay. All right, we approved. Excellent. So we've got a big meeting that I know everybody's been anxious for tonight. We're going to have Jennifer and Catherine introduce people. Before we do that, there's a lot of things that we just want to mention. Just like the last meeting, this meeting will be recorded. So if there's information that you feel like you didn't get the first time around, you can go back and listen to the recording. And then you can always send your questions to Catherine if you have further questions, because oftentimes questions generate questions. So feel free to do that. Hopefully you will get your questions that you sent in answered. And you'll have time. We're going to try to give everybody at least 2 minutes that has a question to go ahead and ask their question. That way, if we give everybody equal time, anyone who wants to speak will get a chance and nobody will be left out. We're going to hear from Mitzi, hopefully. She said she would do that at the last meeting. So she's going to share with us information from the library staff, their feelings about the designs, which will be really helpful. And there were lots of questions about building character and use of materials. And I think that's may end up being a separate meeting. And so either Catherine or Jennifer or someone will speak to that piece. It won't be me. So with that, I'm going to go ahead and let Catherine introduce the team, and then Jennifer introduce her team. Go ahead, Catherine.
Okay, thanks. Looks like Mitzi made it. Great. So we've got, let's see, we've got 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 staff here. So we've got Mitzi Olson. You all know her. She's the librarian from Oak Lodge and Gladstone. Liz Lawson is here. She's taking notes for us. She's our administrative assistant to a specialist to Laura Zentner. We've got Laura Zentner here. She is our director of business and community services. We've got Amber Johnson's here. She is our public and government affairs representative and running the technical side of things tonight. And me, I'm Catherine Krieger, the project manager for the project. Did I miss anybody? Oh, and Jackie. Jackie's here. She's the city administrator from Gladstone. Sorry, Jackie. And I'm going to turn it over to Jennifer to introduce the staff.
So tonight we have 3, 4, 5, 6 people. Myself, project Ray Johnston and the architects.
I think we're losing your audio a little bit, Jennifer.
Oh, sorry. Oh, my connection is, it's not going to be good. My connection just cut out. So do you hear me now?
Yes.
Yep.
Okay. Ray, Mona, Kurt, Jim, and myself.
Hey.
Sorry about that. And I hope I don't cut out later. I'm going to make sure my family is off the internet right now.
One of the things I forgot to mention is that even though it sounds like we might be repeating things, part of it is because it's being recorded for the general public. So if things sound redundant, it's for that purpose. It's not because we're trying to dummy down the meeting.
Yes. Thanks, Lisa. Okay. So I think, go ahead. We're gonna have a little bit of screen time. Catherine, are we ready for me to jump in?
Yes.
Yeah.
Okay. We got to see a lot of questions from everybody, and we really want to save this time for a lot of discussion and dialogue with everyone. We really appreciate all the thoughtful responses and questions that came in, and really helped us be able to make sure that this presentation or discussion responds to the questions that you have from last or 2 week ago presentation. I'm going to share my screen. We have a couple slides to go through just very quickly, just to kind of set the table for the discussion today. We don't have a presentation to provide. We have things we can look at if needed, but we really wanted this to be a conversation. So I'm going to share my screen really quickly here. And hopefully are you all seeing it?
Yes.
Great.
Yes, I am.
Whenever I share, I always lose everybody's view, so I can't tell if you guys are seeing it. So when we were looking at questions, one of the things that we realized, and I'm going to make this a little bit bigger so you can see this. One of the things that we realized is that people have a lot of questions about or comments feeling like the design has already been figured out. And so we felt like it was really important for everyone to understand where we are in this process. So we put together this little diagram. We have talked about this very briefly early on in our process with you, but I think it helps for us to clarify where we are in this larger process. So right now, you know, over the last probably 8 to 9 months, we've been working really in this area right here, the master planning phase. And we started out with site assessment, programming and needs assessment. Now we're at the third stage right here where we're producing design alternatives. There's one more phase after this in the next few months where we're going to be refining a preferred design. But we also have many, 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 many other design phases coming. So, you know, we have schematic design, which will start up once we get through this master planning stage. And that's when we start to really develop the building and understand systems that'll start laying in. Then we'll move into design development. And that really is where we start to define the interior and the exterior. We talk about materials. And then we move into the construction document phase here, which is really where we start to put together the documents that a contractor needs to build the building. And then it'll go into bidding and permitting, where we'll get it through the city of Gladstone and Clackamas County. And then we'll go into construction. What we've been shooting for is early spring of 2022. So I really want everyone to understand we are very early in this process, and nothing, you know, we're just often when we start a process, we need to put something out there to get feedback, and then we'll put something back out there. And so it's a process. So just want to allay everyone's fears if they're worried that everything's all figured out, because this is really the start of our conversation right now. So I don't know if Jim, was there anything else you wanted to add to that at all?
Not really, other than, you know, we're just excited to have a dialogue with you. You know, the last, it's been 2 weeks since we've had a chance to talk, and last time we were really in the presentation mode. And so this is really what we thrive on, is having a conversation with you. So we're excited about it. Thought the questions were great, and look forward to tonight.
So when we were able to go through the questions that people had, we started to see some patterns of questions where we got a lot of questions on certain things, and we could really start to group these questions in areas of discussion. So what we see coming up, we had a lot of questions about entry and about layout in the interior. And so, you know, we're going to try to group our questions with relation to these things so that we can give time for you all to ask the questions that you may have had specific to this, and be sure we touch on the things that we heard in the questions. So we're going to approach this from a way where we're going to start from the inside and work our way out. So we really want to spend a lot of time on points people made or had questions about with the entry and the vestibule and the foundation. Then we want to move into specific interior questions people have. We have Mitzi here, and Ray and Mona can really speak to a lot of the detailed questions that you had about certain things on the interior. And then we'd like to move into a group of questions that were specific to sunlight, daylight, exposure to the elements, sustainability, things we might be thinking about. And related to that are courtyard and landscape. Obviously, there were lots of questions about the courtyard and how to access it and maintenance and that sort of thing. And then we also want to focus on building exterior. There were a lot of questions about the form, about the look, about pieces of that, and how that, that kind of iconic Gladstone civic identity is relayed. So we do want to have some real time to spend to that. So we can pull up a slide if I need to pull up a slide, I can do that, but we'd like to really have this be a dialogue. And so I think Jim, if there's anything else, or Allison, if there's anything else you'd like to add to that conversation about how we go through this, that'd be great, but I'll shut my sharing screen off in just a minute, so.
Yeah, just for folks to know, as Lisa mentioned, I think the real hope is that we can hear from as many people as possible this evening. So use that chat box if you have a comment. In case we're sharing a slide and it's hard to see everybody's face, feel free to just hop in there and let us know if you have a comment or question. I'm going to be making sure that we're moving along so that we do get through all these buckets of questions. So that also goes for the staff. If things are getting a little long-winded, I might gently move us along to the next topic. But I'll be taking notes in a parking lot if there are things that, you know, maybe they relate more to schematic design, to that second phase that's coming up, and it can be something that addressed there. We want to be sure that we capture those questions, but they might not be something that can be answered now. So I'll be taking some of those notes, and we'll kind of go through, as Jennifer said, inside out. So we'll talk about those initial pieces and move through each of those topics of conversation. So if you know that you have a burning question about sort of the exterior look and feel, hold on to that, because we're definitely going to get to that. But we're going to start on the inside of the building first.
Okay. So I'm going to, we have two slides that might be helpful for people, just to remind everybody of the schemes that we looked at. Portland entry, Dartmouth entry, and the corner entry. I think everybody's pretty familiar with these now. And hopefully you all have your packets with you. So if you need to reference something, you also have something to be able to look at when you have questions. But we certainly can pull things up on the screen. And then we just have one other slide that just will remind people kind of the three options, the kind of built ideas we were putting out there to start discussion tonight. So, so I'm going to go back to this, and maybe I think I'm probably going to turn my screen off so that we can start some questions and have a discussion, if that's okay.
Maybe we could start with the entry questions.
That'd be great.
Anybody who has a question about. Go ahead, Nancy.
So 3 of the tables that we worked on had entryways that were angled on the corner, and I didn't see that reflected in any of your final designs.
Yeah, that's something that we did look at. You're only seeing a few of the options and generation of concepts that we explored. You know, when you look at a diagonal entry at the corner, and there's certainly historic precedent for that, typically when you those historic buildings would have one pair of doors. One of the things that we're having to deal with in today's world of environmental design is to create a vestibule. And with that, the geometry of creating a diagonal vestibule starts to result in residual triangulated spaces that actually create quite a bit of inefficiency. And so with a 6,000 square foot library, we're really trying to optimize as efficient of a layout as we can, and to have every square foot be meaningful and impactful in terms of providing program and usable space. They're related to this too, and it was a comment brought up, was having to do with the foundation being located in the vestibule zone. That's true of all the options. I'm going to let Ray talk to it a bit more, but that results in a larger vestibule than you might normally have. It's very typical in many libraries to have the foundation or friends be located outside the primary secure zone of the library, and thus locating it in the vestibule was a very efficient way to think about how to integrate the foundation into the plan. I don't know, Ray, do you want to elaborate on that?
Yeah, you know, and this is one of those places where we're at the interface between conceptual design and schematic design, where the question to me is a conceptual or a schematic question. We located it where we did so that it's front and center, so that if you're coming or going and you have a few minutes to spare, you can duck in there and look at what's available, or just be aware of it as you come and go and enter the library. There have been questions about closing that off, and that's a schematic design problem that we haven't thought about yet. There are probably half a dozen ways to do that, to make it secure when not in use. And then to Jim's point about, you know, triangles versus rectangles, at this conceptual level, we can give you capacity for that friends sale or foundation sale area that is significantly more than if we made it a more triangular space. So I can imagine this topic being explored in greater depth in schematic design. But right now, you can think of it as a cube of space that has the foundation sail in it, that is closable, that's on the path in and out of the library, and that probably is malleable for future studies.
So I'm guessing that the foundation didn't realize that this was just a sales space, and that's one thing to think about. The other thing that I was concerned with was having some sort of iconic entryway that was more than just a door. And so as Jim's indicated, you're talking about, you know, if you angle it, then you're losing space. Is that correct, Jim?
Yes, that's true. Yeah.
Okay, but is there a way, even if it's not at an angle, to make it more of an entryway that is visible from across the street?
The comments brought up about the desire to have an iconic entry. Mm-hmm. I mean, we're totally committed to that, and you're not seeing it yet, and we appreciate that feedback. And we're, as Jennifer said, we're really in the very early stages of design. I think we're very committed to that entry, and that location needs to be iconic, and it needs to reflect Gladstone. And you know, what does that mean, and what are the materials and scale of it? And it's something I think we're very committed to. We don't have an answer to. It's going to be a process of exploration and discovery with you. We do think that, you know, it'll be interesting, even looking back at the one slide with the three views of the corner. The third scheme, the corner scheme we call it, does have a more vertical presence inherently, which is a beginning. It's not an end. But we're very confident, whether the doors are on a diagonal or rectilinear, from our experience, it's not going to impact the ability to create an iconic presence and entry. We think, that's all very possible and important.
So I saw a brief hand from Beverly, and then looks like Lanny also has a question, and Christy. So why don't we go in that order? Beverly, Lanny, Christy.
Well, I was one of the ones that questioned the fact that it looked like all you were doing was making a big entryway and shoving the foundation kind of into the middle of that. With the way our foundation store needs to work, and it's how it works now, and it's how it works out in Canby, we don't man that store. We come in and stock it and see that it's neat and tidy, but the books are taken up to the counter in the library, and the librarians collect the money for it. If you have this, so it's just a walkthrough, the books are just going to walk out. And without it being set up so it looks like a store. I don't know if anyone ever got out and looked at the one in Canby. We looked at the one in Vancouver, and it was separate. It was off the entry, but it was a separate entity. And I think that's really important. Otherwise, it's not going to function as a store. It's just going to function as a walk-away book shelf.
That's good feedback. That's very good feedback. In Vancouver, it was in that case, it's a very good size entry sequence with the restrooms and a meeting room. And in that case, they call it the Friends, but similar foundation. But it's still separate from where you would check out a book or where the librarian station is. I think when they're not open, they would close that down. And when they are open, maybe it was a manned condition in Vancouver. So a different operational model, perhaps, than what you're talking about. So the fact that you need to pay for the books at the librarian's desk, that does change things. That's something, that we really need to think more about. We haven't had this level of conversation about it.
We had talked about that because I had pointed Ray to the one at Canby, because that's the way it functions. And it's basically the way the 4 shelves that we have now in the library at Gladstone functions. I don't know that if Ray had a chance to get out there and look at that or not, but that's the format we're looking for and would work best for our foundation and our library.
Yeah, I didn't get a chance to get out there yet. I think that's something that's probably solvable. And in that schematic design phase, we can look at 3 or 4 different configurations of the foundation sail and the vestibule and the flow of people through, and how the reference or the service point relates to that sail area.
Lorraine just brought up a great point too, and clarified what we probably should have known, is that in Vancouver, they have a money slot. So it's sort of an honor system that they don't bring the money to the librarian. And that might be another approach as well, is to be able to have a place to put your money without having to go up to the librarian. So another approach to think of.
Yeah, I've been seeing that a lot in recent years, and of the half dozen libraries I've visited lately, I think 4 of them had an honor system and they didn't have friends, a person there. A couple exceptions out of those half dozen.
So how about over to Lanny next, and then we'll continue with Christy.
Well, my questions, first of all, I want to echo what Beverly said. We've been very concerned about the location of the bookstore. We wanted it to be near the entry, but not necessarily to be the entry. The other concern I have, right now the foundation, when we are sorting books, etc., we are in the librarian's workspace, and frankly, we get in their way. And we were really hoping to have a separate space where we could sort books without bothering the staff, and a space where we could store books. For instance, if we get some Christmas books donated in July, we'd like to be able to store them on a shelf until December. And I did not see that any place in the plans. We don't need a big space, but we need a place to sort and work and store. So that's my big concern.
See, I can make a couple comments on that. Is we have been discussing this with Mitzi, and given the capacity of the building, 6,000 square feet, there's a distinct choice there. And a way to think about it is that in two of the solutions we have two tutoring rooms. One of those spaces could transition to the foundation. Or we also have about a 25% larger workroom area, almost 30%. So it might be worth entertaining the idea that we can tailor that workroom to provide a better setup to share it between library staff and the foundation.
And that would only work if the library staff was willing to give up some of their...
If I could add a little bit here,
yes,
you know,
please.
so it's always going to be a struggle with a library of this size of balancing the public use area and, you know, some of these other needs that we have. I feel in this case that we could definitely make it work where we're sharing the workspace, where we have a dedicated area that's not really considered to be staff area that's dedicated to the foundation. And if we keep it where it's in the vestibule, we could have potentially a door to make it easier to go in and out. The other comment I'd like to make is that all of these book sale rooms are basically on the honor system. Even at Oak Lodge, at the other places where there's an interior bookstore, it's always on the honor system. People can easily walk out with a book if they want to. I want you just to keep that in mind. There's a lot of background noise here. I'm going to go ahead and mute.
So I know Christy has a question, and it seems like this conversation about the foundation space and some of the different kind of methods that could be explored or uses will be probably something key when we talk about evaluating the different alternatives in our kind of workshop. So Christy, over to you for your question.
My question is kind of mirrors a question that Lisa was posted in the chat room, because I think option 3, I mean, it kind of looks like a corner entry. And I guess from listening to both Jim and Ray talk, this is probably our best and most viable, closest way to get a corner entrance-ish to the library. Am I correct in that?
Yes, I mean, at this point in the process, again, as Ray said, we're in conceptual design. I mean, there's a lot of refinement. But yes, it does acknowledge a corner entry. It faces back actually towards Portland, which is a primary street, and actually works pretty well in terms of the winter winds that come from the southwest. So in many ways, it's a workable solution, we think, and it's efficient and maximizes the other important spaces for library uses. But we're open to continuing to look at it.
Well, that was another one of my questions that I had sent Catherine, was in the diagram on the sun path, it kind of looked like the winter winds were kind of coming in that direction. So I was concerned that that would be an issue, but you're saying you don't think so?
Well, actually, I think facing the due west is, for the doors, is actually helps that condition, and the fact that there's a vestibule makes a huge difference.
Right.
That is an environmental climate chamber that works well. So I thought it was a good question. I noticed that one in particular, and I actually felt like in some ways the way we're organizing the vestibule, where the doors, you come in and you kind of turn towards the north, is actually better than having two sets of doors lined up, where you can have more direct wind coming in. So I think it's a better solution climatically.
Thank you.
Jim, Laureen had a question that she put in the chat of how close in scheme number 3, that corner entry, how close the entry doors are to the study area.
You know, that's about 5 feet, and it's about 5 feet the way it is. And I do want to emphasize that we've been looking at this site and these puzzle pieces at the scale you see them in the drawings. And in schematic design, we take the same kind of care and look at each little component. So I would be a little bit surprised if this entry vestibule at the end of schematic design didn't look a lot different or significantly refined in various ways. And one of the things that might happen is that could be a asymmetrical pair, for example. We do that a lot, where one leaf is maybe 42 inches, and that's the active leaf, and that could slide a little bit north and away from the study area. So this will morph. We'll take these questions and comments and really take them to heart and use them to evolve this as we move forward. So bring them on, and they're probably things we're thinking of in some way, but not tackling yet.
All right, so with that, I think our next cluster of questions were on the building interior itself. So Jennifer, did you want to, oh, and Lisa had a question kind of on process, which is how far away in terms of months are we from final design? I don't know if Jennifer or Jim, you want to take that before we dive into some of those building interior questions.
Yeah, well, this effort takes us through essentially July, I believe. And so assuming things just continue moving straight forward, it's essentially another almost year of effort. To do the schematic design is roughly 2 or 3 months, and then design development's another 3 or 4 months, and working drawings, construction drawings, another 4 or 5. So roughly a year.
So this, Jim, could change considerably in that year's time.
Yeah.
So as Jennifer, when we were having a discussion, described this process where we are right now as a napkin drawing, a napkin sketch. Do you want to speak to that, Jennifer? I think that would be helpful.
Yeah, we were just thinking about what was a good way to describe kind of where we are in the process, and we aren't generating final drawings for a contractor to build from at this stage. What we're doing right now is putting ideas down and getting your input on the ideas. That I think the struggle that all of you are voicing is the struggle with things look very finalized, and part of that is the tools that we use now. You know, a lot of things used to be more hand sketched or not work through to the degree where we can do this now. So the downside of that is sometimes things look much more finished than they actually are. They're still concepts that we're trying to get out there for discussion. So we're at the very beginning of this stage. So I think that's just the thinking we just want everybody to remember, is that this is the process of putting something out there, getting feedback, working on it, getting it back out. We're going to go through that process many, many, many times. So does that help?
Great.
Yes.
Okay, so I'm seeing some thumbs up. That's helpful. Folks are still paying attention. That's great. Did anybody have specific questions that they'd like to ask about building interior? Or even Jennifer, if you want to kind of kick us off with some of the questions that you received, or Jim, kind of looking for hands, but we're talking about the bones of the insides at this point. And we've started to touch on that with the workroom and the foundation room.
Yeah.
What else have we got?
You know, I remember one question, just off the top of my head, and it has a little bit like even the last one, like, well, how close is the study area to the vestibule? Could you switch the children's area and the teen area in option 1? I mean, these are questions that we can address as we move into more detailed design. I mean, what you really need to decide on is, in some ways, what plan offers the most flexible framework that allows you to make some of those choices later. In fact, you know, the layout of your library may change over time too. So you want to, I would think, make your decision on what gives you the most flexibility for how the library might change and grow over time. And so I thought those are good questions, and I think the answer to them is yes, you could switch children's and teens in option 1. That may be a question related to some of the other schemes as well.
I think one part of what Jim's speaking to is that you all are seeing what we've been looking at in the last few months is how hard it is to fit everything in here. And be able to give it enough space to work well. And, you know, if you want to do one thing, it takes away from something else. So it really is like Ray is saying, a jigsaw puzzle of working these pieces together. And I think Jim's comment about we want this, what we're looking for is the flexibility to be able to move something if we need to, or expand an area if you find that it's not working as you thought it would down the road. So that's really what we're looking for at this point, is that ability. Ray, did you have anything else to add to that?
Yeah, I think you guys have both kind of hit the nail on the head here. And it occurred to me reading the questions that a little description of our process might help. And that was, you know, okay, we had the diagrams from the charrette, and then they had characteristics such as an entry near the corner. We went into that, we arrived at this Portland entry, Dartmouth entry, corner entry, and then we started doing what ifs, you know, okay, what if you enter on the corner and right next to it is the children's area? Oh, well then, you know, then we can't put the children's area next to the meeting room. Okay, so what if we slide it over and put it next to the meeting room? And so each of the 3 solutions received that kind of play with the puzzle pieces to see what, you know, given that baseline of Portland entry, Dartmouth entry, or corner entry, what's going to fit the best? And then what you see is our assessment of what seemed to fit the most constraints. And I hadn't actually thought of it until Jim mentioned it, but you really could flip the teen and study with the children, say in option 3. But would you really want to? Would it accomplish a goal that option 3 doesn't? So, so I think it's good that you guys are thinking that way. And each thought about flipping one program area for another can be a discussion. There are pros and cons every time you exchange them. And we're happy to walk through any of those. They're kind of embedded in several of the questions and comments.
Yeah, one other driver on the interior layout, and it actually resulted in a number of modifications to the schemes we're sharing, had to do with the workroom location. We had, in many of them, the workroom pulled away from the entry, and it became an operational issue for Mitzi and the librarians to really have that located right next to the entry vestibule, have the exterior book drop right next to it. That's a real ideal scenario, and certainly in option 2, a challenge when the you know, it's inherent to that particular scheme, but the workroom being pulled away from the entry, you know, operationally isn't so ideal, especially for the patron where the book drops pulled away from the front entry vestibule. So that, you know, we heard that concern as well. There was another concern brought up or question, and it was a good one. We really enjoyed the time we spent with the teens, and there was a real discussion we had with them in terms of how much exposure they have to the street, and it was kind of clear that, you know, if we had a window of the teens just right up next to the sidewalk, that wasn't going to fly. That's not a good scenario. So where we do have the teens having an address looking out towards the street, the idea is to create a landscape zone and buffer. And that's where Kurt comes in with what that is, or even the idea of a privacy screen. One comment was brought up, could it be a two-way mirror, or, you know, and it's like, is there a way, you know, it's our challenge, right? But is there a way to create a privacy screen where you don't feel vulnerable, but there's that kind of filtered view and light and a sense of activity happening in the library that works well from both invigorating the sidewalk activity, but also feeling comfortable from the teens' perspective. That's kind of where our head is right now. We're not sure what the answer is, but we definitely heard pretty clear that the teens don't want to feel like they're on display and feeling too vulnerable.
So Lisa had a question about the service entry in option 2. And I also want to, Mitzi's here kind of to share some insights from operations. So I'm curious if we can maybe address Lisa's question that she put in the chat, but also open up some space for Mitzi. And if task force members have questions that they'd like to ask Mitzi directly about some of her perspectives on operations in any of the schemes, now might also be a great time for that. So I guess that Lisa's question is an option 2, does the service entry have library employees with their back to the entry?
I can address that.
Cool.
The entry door enters into a very small area with a kitchenette. There's a closet near it. There's a easy chair. And then there is a wall of some kind, or we don't know how substantial it'll be. And beyond that are the workstations for librarians. So the short answer is no. The door opens up into a vestibule, basically. That's the break area for the librarians.
Mm-hmm.
Thank you. Maybe open it up. Is task force members any questions that you're sitting with? I'm not seeing, oh, Margaret, go right ahead. Yeah.
My question for Mitzi is, did the librarians themselves have a preferable option? Did they see these plans and did they have one that they preferred?
So we did have the opportunity for staff multiple times to see the plans and to work through with the design team. There was a preferred option. I'd rather not go specifically to that option just because I don't want to hamper the discussion. We'd like to hear comments that you have about each design, but I could talk about why we would be leaning towards one option versus another. And you know, some of that would be flexible space. It's very advantageous to us to have space that we can reconfigure quickly and move things around to accommodate a larger program. Security is also an issue, and visibility. If we have a design where we can't see the entire floor, or if it requires additional people to be staffed, then that's not advantageous for us in the long term. It's also nice to keep the children's area away from the adult computers. There's just activity that goes on that's just not conducive to be sharing the space. And again, the service point visibility, and in some of the plans, you couldn't quite really see very clearly all over the place with one person being out on the floor. And again, that's potentially a security issue. Does that answer your question, Margaret?
Partially.
Yeah.
So Mitzi, in terms of the library as it is now, how easy is it to see like down in the teen room from where like reference librarians are? I'm like, to me, it doesn't seem like it's that easy to have that broad view.
Yeah, and that's a good point. The existing library is just not set up in a way that where we can see everything that's going on. That's partly why we had to move the computers upstairs. So that's an example of a layout that works against the efficiency that we're seeking.
I think one other attribute, I'll just add one comment, and correct me if I'm wrong, Mitzi, but, and Ray, but having some separation between children's and teen area is advantageous as well. And if you have a layout where they're in very close proximity, they want to have separate identities, and so that would be a compromise, I believe.
Other questions on kind of building interior? I know things seem a little fuzzy right now, and there are details that are important but won't be worked out. But Libby has a question. Go for it. Libby, I think you're on mute. We can't hear you.
I unmuted. Can you
there
hear
you
me
are.
now?
We can hear you now. Yep.
On option 3, I don't see a spot that is designated as service. So I'm not real clear on what the intent or plan is on that option for a service area.
Well, let's see, the service by, you mean service point, like the circulation desk?
Yeah.
Most probably, yeah. It is, yeah, it's very faint, and it's, you see the door into the workroom, it's just to the left of that, and it's very faint in the graphic.
Okay.
Yeah, right, when you come in, right to your right, there's the librarian and the service point.
Yeah, I asked that question last meeting, and it just isn't noted on here like it is on all the other drawings. So I just wrote it in.
We missed the label on that one.
Well, sorry. Come on.
Yeah. There's another mistake in last presentation, and if one of you finds it, maybe there's a prize. I don't know.
Don't tell them.
Funny, had Oak Grove in
Don't
here
tell them.
instead of Gladstone on one thing. So.
Yeah, the Concord. Yeah, that was it.
Concord. Yeah, I saw Concord, that.
Yeah.
Yep, okay. I noticed that.
Christy got it.
So Lorene had a question about the movable wall in option 3, and if that was a movable wall, the question was whether it's a movable wall in option 3 between the children and meeting area.
So that is some form of movable wall, and there are, again, this is sort of in the schematic design zone. The ideal one would be something that folds all the way open so that the meeting room could just flow into the children's area. However, those cost about twice as much as the ones that might be more like your 4-panel sliding door at home. So I think we'll be shooting for the kind that fold out of the way, knowing that some version of that will certainly be viable, and budget will kind of come into play.
And if I could just say something about that's an example of the flexible space that we're looking for. If you could imagine that we have a extra large story time, or we have a summer reading program, we can wheel those lower shelving units that you typically find in the children's area, move them out of the way, expand it out. We also have access to the courtyard. that's an example of the flexible space that we're looking for.
So our next kind of topic of questions were on climate and daylight. And there are a few questions on that. But before we move on, I just want to see, and we can always come back, but is anybody else sitting with any kind of interior layout questions that they'd like to get clarified, or anything from Mitzi? Okay, I'm not seeing any hands. So why don't we move on to those climate and daylight questions? Oh, Beverly's got a hand. Go right ahead.
Well, one of the things that I wanted to be sure that whatever design we go with, that all of the areas have nice high ceilings. This is going to be a very tiny library compared to what we really wanted. But high ceilings do help make it seem larger. And when we were in the Vancouver library on that tour, and we went back into their work area, the ceiling was so low that it almost felt claustrophobic. And then if you go into the Milwaukee library where the book, their friend's store is, that ceiling also is low. And the space is nice sized really, but it feels much tinier because the ceiling is so low. And that's something that I feel is a real concern with a smaller library as we're going to be getting.
Yeah, I'll just take that. I mean, those are great comments. I agree on the Vancouver library, that ceiling's low. There are, some existing conditions of tying into the Furstenberg Center that kind of drove that. But I think we have a lot of flexibility really in any of the options to really dial in the appropriate ceiling height to make sure it's comfortable. And you're absolutely right. If there's techniques or ways of making the large reading room even feel larger by expanding that higher ceiling volume, I think that that's something we're going to strive for. And again, the studies that you look at, the three-dimensional massing, those are beginnings. And they, when we look at them, we're already kind of critiquing them ourselves. And I think your comment is an excellent one, how we make all the spaces feel really good. We really don't want to have a situation where the ceiling just feels too low, or, it's a great opportunity.
Well, also by having the ceilings higher and having windows up high, but having some wall space in between, it would give us the option, like they do out in Canby, to hang local artwork and have some kind of something to make the library feel warm and welcoming.
So Beverly, I think that point, I just want to, before we get off of that point, I know there were some questions about the exterior floor area to skin ratio, and that point does speak to that. So that, I think, just to clarify what that means is that, you have a floor area and then you have a wall area. And so there's a balance of efficiency for cost. And when your ratio gets to where your wall area becomes much higher than your floor area, that ratio gets bigger, and thus costs can go up, or it can use more energy because you have more space to heat. So I just wanted to pop that in because I know there were quite a few questions about what that term meant, and we didn't explain it last time.
Yeah,
That's a great point. Yeah.
What are
that's one of the reasons
there?
when you look at option 2, the cost was slightly higher. It had to do with creating more volume. So I was just going to echo the same comment, Jennifer, that it's finding that sweet spot, which we always struggle with, and it comes down to evaluating, is it a foot higher or a foot lower? But I think regardless, we want to make sure the space is as comfortable as possible.
How do the high ceilings?
That has to do with proportions, and Mona's been doing a lot of this modeling, so maybe you could describe the dimensions of some of those rooms, Mona.
Most of our low ceiling spaces right now are either 10 8-foot ceilings or 11-foot ceilings. So I'm guessing that the low ceiling spaces that you saw in other libraries were probably 8 feet. So right now, and again, this is another schematic design issue and a design development issue that we'll continue to refine. But like Jim said, we have a ton of flexibility. And so right now we're showing them quite a bit higher than that 8 feet that I'm guessing you saw in the other spaces.
So Christy has had a hand up, and I also think Lisa has a question that'll segue into our next kind of bucket of questions. So Christy, why don't you go ahead, and then we'll get to Lisa's question.
I just had a quick question about acoustics as far as each of the designs, and then also does ceiling height, I mean, is all that going to play into how the acoustics in the library are? Because clearly we don't want a loud, boisterous, library.
Yeah, well, that's a very important consideration, something we think a lot about. We, personally have worked on a number of performing arts centers and education facilities and libraries. So the acoustics are very important, and certainly the finished material on the ceiling will be that's your kind of primary place to create absorption, but also on walls. So we'll be looking at it very carefully. We'll have an acoustician, an individual consultant who specializes in acoustics. They'll be on our team as well as we move into more detailed design. So they'll be offering input and criteria about, what type of material, what sort of materials giving us the performance we need, the amount of acoustical treatment. So all of that will be engineered and carefully considered.
Will ceiling height play a huge part in that, or?
It does. It certainly, that's the fine balance. That's that sweet spot, right? Of having spatially enough volume. Also not trying to create more height that creates an energy issue. If you have a wall of glass, that tends to be a hard surface, but if you have more mullions, you can break it up acoustically too, instead of having flat surfaces. So there's a lot to it. And that's why the design process takes a while. It's an iterative process. You don't have the solution right away. You kind of work through this, but that's a super important criteria, and we're going to take that very seriously.
Thank you.
I want to make sure we have time to speak to the courtyard, because I think a lot of people had some courtyard questions, and we have Kurt here, so we want him to have some time to talk.
Yeah, so actually, I think Lisa's question that she put into the chat is a great segue. She was asking if there's enough space in the courtyard of option 3 for seating or a walkway or a water feature. So Kurt, I'm wondering if you can speak a little bit to that.
Sure. Yeah, I think each of the schemes offer different opportunities in terms of the amount of space for landscape and hard surface. And I think, even though we're showing them all, mostly all is green, I think the idea is that even with some of the smaller spaces, like that particular option, I think there is some room for some smaller seating areas. Water features are always, they have, good points and bad points. It's really nice to be able to hear a little bit of white noise with water features. They do tend to have some maintenance associated with them. So if we do decide to do something like that, I think we want to keep it really nice and simple. But yeah, I definitely think there's opportunities for kind of some smaller seating and gathering areas within that scheme in each option.
Yeah, I'll just add to that. I think in both option 2 and option 3, the size of the courtyard's larger, so it naturally kind of provides more opportunity for seating with landscape. And the courtyard also becomes an opportunity for art and sculpture. There's just a lot that can happen within the ambiance of what that courtyard is, and how even the character of that courtyard can start to spill out and almost inform some of the landscape between the sidewalk and the building as well. So I think the idea in some ways is that the whole library experience is connected to nature, which could, and that could be a lot of things in terms of how it's actually designed.
Yeah, definitely.
Nancy had a question that she just popped in on whether the courtyard area will have an exterior entry for maintenance. And Nancy, were you referring to it in all the schemes or just in one of the schemes?
Well, actually, there's no possibility for exterior entry on 1 and 2. So it becomes a problem for people who are maintaining the building, who have to haul machinery and you know, sprayers or lawnmowers or any kind of maintenance into courtyards. We see that in the schools a lot, where they fill in a courtyard and then they're pushing the lawnmower down the hallway to get it in.
Yeah, I think, some of the options that don't have that direct access, we need to be really careful in terms of the plant material that we're specifying. And we've done it before. Certainly, I don't think we would consider lawn because we would have concerns with lawnmowers going through the library. But there is, there are a number of types of plants that don't require a lot of maintenance, are drought tolerant, and we would hone in on those. I think we just pick a particular type of plant, like a fern, let's say, and some of these gardens are north shaded, so they're not going to get a lot of sun. So if we plant ferns, those are like bulletproof plants. They only need to be trimmed like once a year. So we want to pick plants where they're not having to go in and maintain every week. Perhaps they check in every month, and there's a good kind of maintenance regimen maybe every 3 months or so. So each one kind of presents different opportunities and constraints.
I'll just add to that we did a courtyard at University of Oregon for the science library, and it's a subterranean courtyard. The only access to it is through the library, and it's just what Kurt's describing. The plant material is all low maintenance. It's really one of these things where you periodically go in with a garden bag and some pruners type of level of maintenance. So keeping it pretty low tech, so you don't need a big storage area for garden maintenance.
And Todd is suggesting the moss garden. Thanks for that suggestion, Todd.
Yeah, very
Lisa
good.
If a story time could be held in the courtyard of option 3, and maybe that's also a Mitzi question too, if that space might be big enough for something like that.
I'd like to jump in here quickly and just say the courtyard in option 3 is about 20 by 50. So you could think of it as 2 small classrooms next to each other. That's about how big it is.
Yes, there's plenty of space for story time and maybe even a program out in the courtyard. It's a very, especially in option 3.
I like that idea.
So I know we had quite a few questions about building exterior, and I think there's even going to be a suggestion. We are kind of in our final 20 minutes of our meeting. We want to make sure that we have some time for public comment. But let's start to dig into building exterior questions, and then we can talk a little bit about some of these civic identity questions and Gladstone character, because that came through in a lot of your questions as well. So thinking about the exterior of the building and kind of keeping in mind that a lot of this might come out in schematic design in that next phase, are there questions that folks have that they're sitting with that they want to ask of the consultants? Looking for hands or things in the chat. Or even if, oh yeah, Beverly, go for it. I see Beverly, I see Lisa.
Well, the design that you show on this, and I understand that this was just something to show us, but I'd like to see us stay away from something that looks like what Milwaukee is, which this looks much like what Milwaukee is. I'd like it to look more like what Gladstone should look like. And to be, I know you've got to do some screening, and I know that's important for the sun and that type of thing, but and I know money will be a constraint, but it needs to be interesting and fit the city.
Mm-hmm.
And be something that hopefully will not become dated looking in a short period of time.
Yeah, you've set a challenge, and I think we're definitely excited about that. We want it to fit Gladstone. In some ways, these are massing studies to really suggest volume, where we might have glass versus solid surfaces. We intentionally, they all look pretty white. That's not our intent by any means. So they're really an abstraction, and it helps. It gives us confidence with the cost estimate that was done. All this information was shared with the cost estimator, so they know what sort of vertical height we're starting to look at, the massing, where you might have windows. Is there some type of screening perhaps? They're kind of placeholders, but it gives us confidence that the cost estimates that were developed, we can hang our hat on. So that was a big part of this as well. I wanted to make sure we're all aware of it. But yeah, the character and the design of this is something we're excited to spend some time really talking about. And you all have shared some interesting examples too, buildings in Gladstone that you feel are indicative, that kind of capture Gladstone character and style. So we really kind of look forward to having a dialogue on that. Maybe, today we don't have time, but maybe, if we can schedule something even next week, that would be great.
So I saw a hand from Lisa, and I also see a hand from Todd and Lanny. So Lisa, Todd, Lanny.
So I was just wondering if where the screening is for the sun and also for the privacy, if it's possible to use some kind of plant life on that screening to kind of just add some change of.
Yeah, that's a great point. We've actually been kind of thinking along those lines as well, as can you somehow develop a screen, and certainly we actually thought the way it's rendered now kind of has a jail-like feeling to it, but we wanted to make it feel kind of generic and didn't want to get ahead of ourselves. But whatever you draw, it's fully loaded with character. And so we appreciate that comment. But yes, is there a way that it can be an armature for plant material to grow up and be part of the building? I think those are exciting ideas. I think we all feel that. It's almost like the garden inside the library is turned inside out. And I think the character of Gladstone is so much about the landscape, and we could talk at some length about that. It would be really fun to do that maybe next week, but I feel like the natural setting, the history of Gladstone and the residential context, the beautiful gardens, Christie's, for example, that's so much about the Gladstone experience. So is there a way to even build that into the exterior? That could be interesting.
So how about over to Todd next?
First, I wanted to comment on Nancy's comment on the entry at the very beginning, because I agree with that completely. Second, part of the apprehension about the finished look of the building, or the finished, are we ahead of the design thing, is the, cut and paste aspect of all the pictures. It looks like you just pull it off the design drawing and put it there. And that's probably what you did, because that's the stage where we are.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
But, I'd like a strong design, a pretty building.
Mm-hmm.
And I heard the, like on the north side, there's a blank wall. Ew. Or it was referred to as blank in the last meeting. I think, at the very least, it's an opportunity for some kind of expression.
Sure.
Everything is. And I believe in design.
Mm-hmm. Yep. So do we.
Thanks.
And I think in that comment, just to, in options 1 and 2, on the north side, there were more solid walls. It's not to say they couldn't be an interesting wall. So you're right, Todd. We may not have stated that very well, but in option 3, there is more of the higher clear story window and kind of a sense of being able to look into the library, at least that feeling. So that was kind of a distinction that we were making, but probably could have stated that better.
So I think we've got a number of comments still. Lanny, I believe I saw Nancy, and I also see Natalie. So Lanny, over to you.
Okay, this is a slightly different topic. People of Gladstone have been waiting for a new library since eons ago. And I think that many people in Gladstone would like to have some kind of buy-in with the library. Is there going to be any opportunity where there could be, we could sell tiles or bricks or something so people could feel some ownership in this library? And it would raise funds for the library also. Is that possible?
Mm-hmm.
Like bricks
Well,
in
maybe
the...
I could weigh in on that a little bit.
Yes,
you know, there's, I think we have yet to sort of see how the funding program fleshes out. There are, typically, it starts with kind of a silent campaign, putting the funding package together. And then as you get closer to success, you start rolling out the smaller components. And in between are some of the bigger ones. So the opportunities I've seen are pretty endless, ranging from the naming of a meeting room,
right,
to the naming of a piece of furniture, or tiles or pavers in a courtyard, or benches, or all kinds of things. And it's the most successful ones I've seen are when the combination of the foundation and the government agency involved really strategize and create a program where they go step by step to really bring some excitement to the community, and along with that, the money to build the building. So we keep our eyes on those opportunities all the way through. I think there'll be a lot of them.
Okay, good. But I think a lot of people would, to name a room would be pretty expensive, but there are a lot of people who would probably be interested in buying a brick or a tile or, something like that. So I think we need to keep that in mind.
Yeah, we definitely will.
Nancy, I think I saw your hand. Did you have a question?
Well, I just wanted to capitalize on what Todd said about how we feel about the beauty of the building. We have a lot of buildings in Gladstone that we're very proud of. And I don't know that we've necessarily shared those styles with you. I suppose we could each send you a list of what we really, really like. But my first house in Gladstone was a craftsman bungalow with a river rock fireplace over by the river, which is essentially in the same neighborhood as the library. And I would like to see going that direction more than the really modern rendition that we're seeing in these drawings, which I know are just sketches. I appreciate that. But if you look at some of the Adventist property and the buildings that they've put up with the stone, look at the Union Hall over by the river with the brick and the big the woodwork and things like that. Tell me now if I need to dial down my expectations, because those are beautiful buildings, and I'd love to see the library reflect that in our community.
Well, Nancy, this might be a good segue. I think this is something we're going to cover in our next steps, and I do want to get to Natalie's question as well. But I think one of the things that Catherine was going to put forward to the group, and maybe we can get a little temperature check, is an additional meeting next week if folks would like to attend. To talk kind of more specifically about Gladstone character. I think that the questions came through, and Jennifer, correct me if I'm wrong, that there were a lot of questions and concerns that speak to the things that you just raised, Nancy, about, what are our expectations here, and what is Gladstone's character, and what do we want this to look like? So maybe if you can just give a little thumbs up if you would be interested in attending something like that, just, you know, to talk more about kind of exterior character, how the building fits into the streetscape. It'd be same time, same place, just next week. I'm seeing some thumbs up, so I think that we can probably put that on the books, but we'll touch on that more in the next steps. Just wanted to kind of recognize Nancy's point and offer some space to deep dive into this. I don't think folks have to come. There won't be any big decisions made. It'll just be instead an opportunity to chat more deeply. Natalie, over to you. You've been waiting very patiently.
I don't have a question so much as I just have a share. This last Saturday, I went to a restaurant that was right next door to the California Pizza Kitchen in the Clackamas Town Center. And in the back of the pizza place, they had a beautiful, I think it was like an aluminum powder coated trellis, and they had greenery that was growing up it, and it looked very nice. So if anybody wanted to take a look at it, I think that might be a good way to get some ideas for some of the blank walls that would warm things up outside or possibly inside.
Yeah. That's great.
So it's on the back wall of the pizza kitchen where it faces the sushi restaurant that's right there.
Okay.
So I think we had, Christy had popped a question into the chat while we were discussing, just asking what design is the most energy efficient? And I'm curious if consultants can weigh in on that, and then maybe we'll move into next steps into our public comment.
Yeah. Well, I mean, I might take a first stab at that. You know, when you have a building that has a strong west orientation, that's always tough light to be able to filter. And it's also, the sun's low in the sky and it creates a lot of potential heat gain. So that's a tough orientation. South can be, although there's ways to deal with that. The best energy, you know, and for daylighting is really a north window wall. And because, you know, we have insulated glass, we're less concerned about losing heat versus gaining good daylight without heat gain. So, I mean, certainly option 3, the massing of it works well with opening up to the courtyard in the north light. The diffuse light's the best, especially in a library where you want to have good daylight, but you don't want to have the direct sunlight come in. So that's inherently energy efficient. And then, you know, that balance of where you put glazing versus solid walls is going to be part of that equation of the envelope design and how energy efficient it can be.
You get close to a net zero?
Well, you know, this project, we just did a net zero building up at the Oregon Zoo. It's the education center there. So we haven't done the analysis of it yet, but the scale of the building lends itself to it. We did another net zero building in Hood River. It's a middle school. It's a science and art school in Hood River. So we've done 2 net zero. The scale of this is one that is intriguing to be able to hit net zero, but you're not going to, pardon me?
Have you eaten?
Oh, I think this has a lot of potential. We would dive into that analysis early in the design process.
Thank you.
I'm just gonna, and I think we need to wrap it up. And Lisa had a question about the green rating. Green rating is something that will come later in the process. It's a conversation about where you want to hit, what the cost is. So that's a much developing conversation through much of our process. So I'll put that one in the parking lot for now.
So I think, Catherine, it might be you and I to talk about next steps and what's coming up. I think you're on mute still.
Got it. I got kicked off a couple of times, so hopefully I won't now. I am going to share my screen. Can you see that?
Yes.
Okay. Just quickly want to run through this. So this meeting next week is the optional one that Alice is talking about. It would be a great opportunity to get some momentum and to continue this conversation. So that would be next Wednesday. And it sounds like we could make that an optional, and those that are interested could come to that. And then we've got a meeting on the 17th. We are going to review the preliminary, do the criteria evaluation. I want to make sure, Allison, you remember to remind everyone they're going home with some homework tonight for this meeting on the 17th. On July 1, we will provide input on a draft public survey that Allison is working on. And then just through the summer, July and August, we'll have a virtual open house. August, at a time to be determined, we will have a very specific time for public input. And then September, final evaluation, where you will take everything you've learned in this master planning process and determine the preferred alternative. And from there, the design team will roll into September and October, refining it. We don't have all the dates figured out specifically, and then make a recommendation in about October, November to the board on your preferred alternative. And we're also hoping at this point we can have a big party to celebrate all of the work that you've done.
Have you emailed this, what we're looking at, out to us?
No, but I will.
Okay,
This is a
thank
little
you.
bit of an enhancement from what's on your agenda.
Okay, thank
I'll
you.
email that out. So I'll make sure you have that.
Perfect.
And Catherine had mentioned some homework. So you're either going to get a link to a survey tonight or maybe first thing tomorrow morning. But we'll be sending you within the next 24 hours a link to a survey where you'll be asked to walk through each of the design alternatives, the 3 alternatives, and kind of have a go at evaluating them based on the criteria that we spent some time working through. So how well you think each of these alternatives performs in those criteria. It's a little overwhelming. You know, it's I think we had a criteria A through I, so however many that is, I can't remember right now. But so think about taking some time for that, and we want to give you 2 weeks to do that exercise. And don't worry if you kind of are going back and forth between things. We're going to ask you to rank on a red, yellow, green. So green is performing really well, yellow it's okay, and red is that it's not really delivering on that criteria. You can absolutely change your mind down the line. I anticipate that this will just be a way for us to frame our conversation when we come back together on the 17th of June for that sort of evaluation workshop. We'll be able to see where there's quite a bit of agreement with the group, where there's quite a bit of disagreement, and start to frame our conversation that way. So we might not need to talk about the things that you all agree on. If you all think something is really red in a lot of these areas, and we can instead talk about the places where you don't have as much agreement and kind of work through some of those things and make sure that the design team is hearing your feedback and your thoughts and your opinions on this is really crap, but this is totally awesome. And making sure that those things are being incorporated into, you know, their refinement of alternatives, of the alternative down the line. You won't have to make a final decision until after public input. So it's not your one shot, and you're going to be able to kind of gut check what you talk about in that workshop with the feedback from the public. So I just want to say, don't stress too much about homework, but I think it'll be an interesting activity for folks to walk through that and to do your own evaluation. You can talk to each other about it. You can share your notes if you want to. Feel free, but we'll give you until June 15th, and I'll make sure that that's really clear in the email when we want you to get those results, and so I can have some time just to compile the results and make sure that they're ready to show you. So sound good? Look for that in your email. It'll either probably come from Catherine or myself, but we'll make sure that you get that shortly in the next 12 to 24 hours, I promise. Lisa, where are you on my screen?
I'm at
Are you okay if we open it? There you are. You're at the top. Are you okay if we roll into public comment?
Yeah. Is there
Cool.
anyone that has comment from the public?
Feel free to raise your hand. And actually, I'm going to go ahead and unmute Commissioner Savas, because Commissioner Savas has been here from the beginning of the meeting listening to our discussion. So, Commissioner, can you hear us?
Yeah, I can. Don't have much to say other than I really appreciate all the ideas, a lot of brilliant questions, observations. It's very pleasing to hear the engagement and how constructive the comments and ideas and thought sharing is. So just want to say my hat's off to you. It's very exciting to see the drawings and how you're working through all of it. And my hat's off to all the good work you're doing. Keep it up.
Thank you. We appreciate your support.
You're welcome.
Thanks, Commissioner. Lisa, I don't see any other hands, so I'm going to pass it back over to you.
So we just have an optional meeting next Wednesday, June 10th. And if you can't make that one, the next one is the 17th of June. And if you have other questions that you feel like you didn't get answered or you didn't feel comfortable asking in this forum, you can always shoot them to Catherine, who can give them to the design team and they'll work on them. So with that, I think we're ready to adjourn unless anybody has any last minute questions. Looks like we're good. All right. Thanks, everybody.
Thank you.
Thank you.
you.
Bye-bye.
Thanks, everyone.
Bye-bye.
Bye.
Bye.